So when you were reading about this, where do you start reading on something like this? You were reading the Hebrew Bible, you had read the Christian Bible. What other, well, actually at that point they're the same, right? With that story.
Yeah.
So what other kind of historical documents did you consult but when you were reading about this?
Well, I read the Christian commentators. I read the Jewish commentators, I mean, as many as I could. And I also ventured into reading Muslim commentators. And that was the most fascinating part of all. That's the part I really loved.
Why is that?
Well, I learned a whole other side to the story. In Judaism and Christianity, the story is that Abraham and Sarah exile Hagar into the desert, where she goes with her little child and almost dies, but God intervenes and saves her. And then she goes off and she's fine and she starts a new people with her son. So it's a complicated story that I think we feel kind of guilty about, you know, the tragic victim Hagar. But in Islam, Hagar actually volunteers to go off into the desert. She says to her husband Abraham, she says, I know that we need to spread the word of the one true God, Allah, and so I will go with you to help you do that. So he takes her by the hand, and instead of taking her to the desert, which is the desert of the Torah or the Bible, he leads her, in fact, all the way to Mecca, which actually doesn't exist yet. She's about to invent it. But he leads her to Mecca, and he leaves her there alone, which she's sad about. But then she understands that it's the way of God, so she stays with her baby Ishmael. And as in the Bible, she gets really thirsty, and the baby's on the brink of death. You know, they need water. And in the Bible, she just bursts into tears, and God shows her a well, and all is well. In Islam, she practically puts on her track shoes. It's such a great story. She shows so much initiative. She gets up, and she runs to the nearest mountain, and she climbs to the top of the mountain, and she looks all over for water, but she can't find it anywhere. So she runs back down the mountain, and she runs up the next mountain. She looks everywhere for water. She can't find it. So she repeats this 7 times. And finally, the angel of God comes to her and says, look, here's water. He strikes the earth with his heel. She runs to it. She drinks from it, but then she does something really miraculous according to Islam. In fact, Muhammad calls her the most blessed of all women. She actually engineers or makes a well, which may not seem very exciting to us, but if you're a desert dweller, which she was, she knew that she had to trap the water and keep it for posterity. Otherwise, just springs on the surface of the desert are going to evaporate. And in fact, the well that she makes becomes the holiest water traditionally in Islam. It's called the Zamzam, the well. And every year, and in fact about a week or two, Muslims every year on their Hajj to Mecca reenact Hagar's journey back and forth, running back and forth between the two hills, and also drinking from the well that she actually builds with her own hands. So in Islam, I discovered this amazing Hagar, this woman filled with initiative and courage, who was an engineer, and also some marauding tribes people go by when she's next to her well with her baby, and they want to drink from the water, and she fends them off. I love this as a single mother. She fends them off and says, no, 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 the water rights are for my son Ishmael, and they go away. So she's
not too marauding, really. More
no,
fairly
right.
polite.
They were polite marauders.
Right.
And then, so she is an incredible sort of formidable force. And I really loved seeing her through that lens, from victim to matriarch. It was very inspirational.
Okay. Do you have a favorite passage from the book that you might like to share?
This is the passage that I would sit as I was contemplating my conversion to Judaism. Every year during the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, this particular story is read. And that was another part of my bewilderment and sort of fascination with the story, is why would the story of Hagar, who's traditionally not an Israelite or a Jew, why would Jews every year sit and listen to this story? So this is my imagining of the story.
Okay.
A heartbroken man stands at the threshold of his tent, watching the desert unfold. It is daybreak, and golden hills ripple gently across the horizon. He knows how dangerous the sands can be. Giant dunes shift in the wind. The nearest well is at least a day's journey away. By the time the sun has reached its peak, the heat will be unbearable. The man's name is Abraham, and it is into this wilderness that he has banished 2 members of his camp, his second wife and the teenage son he loves. He watches them now as they fill sacks with lentils and water. He helps the woman strap on her pack, but says nothing to her. There's nothing left to say. He knows she and the boy have little chance of survival. They will face suffocating heat, dust storms, and paralyzing despair. He's certain he'll never see them again. The woman's name is Hagar, and Abraham's relationship with her has nearly ruined his life. The young man beside her is Abraham's firstborn son, Ishmael. Standing behind Abraham is his first wife, Sarah, a woman whose legendary beauty has made pharaohs and kings desperate for her love. In her arms, Sarah holds a little boy, Isaac, born after decades of prayer and aggravation. Sarah can't help but feel triumphant now, confident in both her husband's fidelity and the belief that her son will become Abraham's only heir. When Sarah turns away, Abraham stares after Hagar, memorizing her shape, listening for Ishmael's voice. He watches until their shadows grow fainter. As soon as the figures have disappeared into the desert, he, Sarah, and Isaac go together into their tent. Abraham has obeyed his wife's demands to reject Hagar and Ishmael, just as God had commanded him to do, but it is less clear that he's adhered to the second part of God's command. Do not be distressed over the boy or the woman. How can he stop thinking about them? How can he stop worrying about their fate? Really, how can I stop worrying about their fate?
Okay. So how long did the book take you to write after you had decided that you were going to make it a book? Some amount of time into the research behind it?
I would say, it's funny with books. I'll bet lots of your authors tell you that. In some ways, they begin when we're children, I think. But
not a lot, no.
Really?
Not,
okay,
not
well, this book had its origins in my childhood. But the actual writing and research of the book, I suppose, took about 6 years, 5 or 6 years.
Mm-hmm.